In this video, I'm going to talk about resetting your default mode, and this is a really important one. Our default mode is something that we do without conscious thought. It's the actions and behaviours we take naturally. It's those actions and behaviours that are ingrained into us and that we've grown with for many years. This is the actions that we default to. But lots of us aren't the person we want to be. And lots of times that's because default mode is flawed. And this is something that we need to work on, and this is something that we need to fix. A good example is if you're out and you're eating in a restaurant with friends and family. You might order a glass of wine or a Coke or whatever drink that you're having. You're going to have your meal, maybe there's some chips with it, and then maybe you order dessert afterwards. And this is what you expect of yourself. It's probably what you expect of your family and friends, and maybe it's what they also expect of you. Now, if you were to change that, and if you were to say, I'm not going to have the chips, give me a salad instead with my meal, I'll have a water to drink, and I won't have any dessert, then you might face judgment, and people might ask you why. This is because, unfortunately, unhealthy choices are our default mode. In many cases, in most cases, it can be difficult to eat healthily. We're surrounded by so much junk and high sugar processed foods. So lots of times our default mode includes these unhealthy things. And this is something that we want to change. It's like at work, or if you visit someone and they're offering you cakes and biscuits, and if you say no, then they'll ask why. It's because it's ingrained into everyone. Why don't you want these foods? Another example is when we're feeling sick. Lots of times we reach for those comfort foods, those high sugar foods. It's what I used to do a lot. I used to have like a 7-Up, so like a sugary drink, and toast, something bland. But there's much better options out there. Soup is a fantastic option, but lots of times our default mode is choosing those unhealthy options, even though we know they're not best for us. Maybe it's something we grew up with. It's like an ingrained behavior and action that we turn to in these situations. So what we want to do is reset our default mode, because that's what's going to lead to the lasting change. We need to do that for long-term results, because what you don't want to do is get into a weight loss mode and focus on that for the next few months. And then when that's done, revert to your default, which you've been doing for decades, and then gain the weight back. So we want to reset the default to make sure all these results are long-term. And it's extremely possible, and our clients do it. So I want you to feel confident that you can also do it. When people first start our program, they obviously cut back on the unhealthy sugars and starches and processed foods, and even things like fruit. But when people get to maintenance, they can include some of those healthy ones back in, the starches from vegetables and fruit. But lots of times, even in maintenance, people don't want to do this. They choose not to do it. And these are the same people who would have been addicted and would have had lots of cravings for these, let's say the unhealthy ones, the sugary foods. They don't want to include them back in. And why is that? Because they have reset their default. Their default is now healthier options. Lots of times they can't believe what they would have eaten before. A good thing to do is to write down a typical day that you would have had before you started the program. And then look at what you're eating now, or if it's still the early days in the program for you, then give it a few months and look back at that list. And I'm sure you'll be surprised by the types of foods that were your default options compared to the types of foods that are now your default options. And this is something I can relate to, because lots of times people think it's easy for me. But this is something I also had to go through. It was back in 2012 when I realized that there's a lot of hidden sugars in a lot of the foods that I was eating, the everyday foods. And I needed to lose weight. I needed to improve my gut health. And I wanted to cut out bread and pasta and cereals and all these things that I speak about in the videos. And it took me 2 years to do it because I didn't have any help. So I know it can be difficult, but I want you to know that it's absolutely possible. So how do you go about resetting your default? Well, there are 5 key steps, and I'm going to go into these in more detail in the next lesson. But the first one is you're going to ask yourself, what do I want? You're then going to go deeper and ask yourself, why do I want this? And this is going to be your motivation. and you're going to uncover the benefits that you're going to gain. Number 3 is decide to do it, so getting a firm commitment. Number 4 is think positively, which is one of the key core messages in the mindset series, and in previous lessons we cover this, and I'm going to speak about it more also in the next lesson. And then number 5 is commit to your decisions, how to stick to your plan. It's like doing the declaration that we did in the onboarding section. What we want to focus on in terms of resetting our default is that it's not about restriction. It's about creating that new normal, the new normal go-to choices in terms of food, in terms of exercise, in terms of looking after yourself and putting yourself first. And once you start doing this, you will never want to go back.